Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys are all doing really well. We'll just kind of say hi and talk a bit while we wait for maybe a few more people to come in. Um, Today is kind of it's going to be a bit of a heavier stream, not maybe my usual happy content involving animals and discussions of animals, but I think it's just as important for right now. Yeah, me. There is in my home province of Manitoba, there's a really important trial going on right now. It just started. I totally understand, Bear. Oh, okay. You guys, like, I understand if maybe like it's going to be a bit of a heavier topic. I understand, and I want to make sure that like everyone is kind of aware of that. There's going to be a few disclaimers. Like the first disclaimer is that I think it's really important to talk about. Yeah, I'm not Indigenous. Um, I'm very white. I am white. But I want to talk about this because I think when you have different groups of minorities, our rights intertwine, and missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit has that overlap with the LGBTQ plus, because Two Spirit falls within the LGBTQ plus as well. So I think it's important that we talk about these things, and also just as a human right, like Indigenous women and girls and Two Spirit are significantly more likely to experience violence, both domestic, SA, compared to other counterparts in their communities. So I think it's just a really important subject, and this trial is a pretty big deal. It maybe doesn't seem as big of a deal compared to other previous trials, but it is a big deal because it involves the killing of 4 Indigenous women within the province of Manitoba. So we're like smack dab in the middle of Canada. But, and also, the reason the stream is titled Search the Landfill is because we're still trying to get 3 of the bodies found, which I think also is a really important thing, that three of these women are still in a landfill, which is, I can't imagine the pain and suffering someone has to feel, like would feel, knowing that their loved one is in one. So we'll just kind of wait. I don't know if anyone else is coming in. Yeah, no worries. Um, and tomorrow is, in Canada at the very least, is Red Dress Day, and Red Dress Day is to, I don't want to say commemorate, but like to acknowledge missing and murdered Indigenous women. So when you see the beaded red dress pins, those are for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So the red dress pin, I think it can be associated with a couple other things, but in this context, it's for that. I have one. It is still packed away because I haven't quite finished moving. I will, like, if you go online, there's like a ton of Indigenous creators who make them. There's one I really like, but I don't know if she can ship outside of Canada because hers are made with seal skin. So, hello BBQ. I'm glad you're I'm happy you're here this morning. I can't talk. So, um, first things first, we are going to take that off of the screen and just go through, I guess, like the basics of what we know. So, we have a timeline as provided to us by CBC. CBC is one of the biggest groups in one of the biggest news organizations in Canada. Um, so we're just going to go through the trial timeline of this. So these are the four women that we do know: Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myran, and Rebecca Contois. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And a fourth identified victim, her name we don't know, but she has been given a name by the community. So it is Buffalo Woman. She is referred to as Buffalo Woman. And so when we talk about this, you'll hear her name that come up quite a bit. And there's a lot of reasons that, if we have time, I'll discuss as to the importance of giving her a name. So the news was shocking. Four women all allegedly killed in Winnipeg by the same man in the span of 2 months. So this is considered a serial killing over a spree killing. I remember Mrs. Parker was covering a trial that happened in Texas, right near the border, and there was kind of a discussion about, like, is this a spree killing or a serial killing? But this is considered a serial killing. Rebecca, 24, was remembered at the vigil as someone who always had a heart for everything. Morgan Harris, 39, whose daughter said the mother of five and grandmother was happy-go-lucky and silly. Mercedes, 26, whose grandmother remembers her as happy, smiling, and trusting. And the fourth woman, again, we don't know who she is at this point in time, is and it will be referred to as Buffalo Woman. So they're all Indigenous women within the province of Manitoba, and speaks to a wider issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls in Two-Spirit. Canada did have, at the beginning of Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, the review and the calls to action. Now, one of the big issues with the calls to action is that none of them have really been implemented. I'm going to take him off of screen. None of them have been implemented really well. So while we are aware of things that we can do, that the government can help do both at a federal and provincial level to make a safer environment for these people, it's just not there. It has, we're still working to implement. We're still trying to do better, I think, is the best way to put it. And at this point, as people in our communities, I do have an article linked. Buffalo they are native to the prairies of Manitoba. So Winnipeg is Treaty 3 territory, I believe. And is it, like, I'm sorry, I'm a little disorganized. But yes, buffalo are important. They are native to Manitoba, or they were. There's not a whole lot left. Buffalo do tend to represent strength and healing, and it was important for their community to give her a name, because having a spirit name, I guess, is what they were calling this. It allows for her to be recognized here and in the spirit world, and it allows her to have an identity, so she's not forgotten too. And I think that's another really important aspect when we talk about these things, is that when we don't have an identity for the victim of a crime like a murder, they should be given something. So, like, normally you hear Jane Doe or John Doe, and that's like a way to help remember them, give them a name and an identity. We had the boy in the box, who was recently identified. he was given a name as well. So this is the man who is alleged to have murdered all five or all four of them. The trial has started, as I said at the beginning. Um, we'll talk a bit about that if we get the chance. If not, I'll probably do another stream. I want to cover this a little bit. And one of the big things to note is that, like, we're still in trial. He is the alleged killer, and he has pleaded not guilty um, due to, I believe it's not guilty because of mental health issues. So he's not like criminally responsible for what he did, is what they're arguing. Um, According to court documents and hearings, Skibicki has threatened to kill two previous partners in recent years. He's convicted of assaulting one of those two women and charged with the assault and the connection with the other. The charges in the later case were stayed a few months before Skibicki was alleged to have killed the first of these four women. Posts on a Facebook page linked to him, dated before his arrest earlier in the year, were rifled with violent sentiments, anti-Semitic, misogynistic, white supremacy. So he's kind of a known white supremacist, or he's at least making those claims on his Facebook page. He's making really horrendous comments that should be alarming. So I think, like, also at our current climate, we see people posting these things. We see people posting anti-white rhetoric, or not anti-white, white nationalist rhetoric, racism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, and just levels of bigotry. And we should be aware of those things, because when those things are normalized, it kind of can cause further issues. Yeah, I think it is very interesting. Names are important in the sense that they do allow us some individuality and to be identified outside of. I know we have surnames, and surnames are really common, um, because it would like identify you to a family, but having a first name also is really important. And I think it's important too, because she is indigenous and there is that epidemic of women and girls who are going missing, who are being murdered and experiencing all sorts of violence, that she have a name that reflect her identity. I do think that's important. It was a community given name, so and indigenous elders and leaders and community members gave her that name. So why is it called Search the Landfill? Again, we're still searching a landfill. We want this landfill to be searched. They believe, at the very least, that they're the remains of two of the victims. So the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs is studying whether or not they could, whether a successful search of the landfill could be done. It's going to cost a lot. It's going to take up to 3 years, they estimate. But most Manitobans, I would say, like a lot of us, it was like we just had an election, a provincial election. It was like a budget. It was an issue when it came to the election. But people want the landfill search. People want these women to be found. So they do, at the very least, believe that Morgan Harris and Marcedes Myran are in this landfill. They have, from my understanding, a rough idea of whereabout they are. There's been vigils held out there. The landfill, I believe, has been closed, or at least that section of the landfill has been closed off. They've lit sacred fire and laid tobacco down. There was a camp. The camp has moved to the location of the Human Rights Museum, which is in Winnipeg, which is the provincial capital of Manitoba. February 8th, 2023, the federal government says it will provide $500,000 to fund a study on whether or not the remains could be recovered. The update comes after Ottawa. So when they say Ottawa, they're talking about like our federal government, Trudeau's government, said in December that they would cover the cost of the feasibility study. So we were told, the Manitoba Chiefs Assembly was told, and it was relayed to like the rest of Manitoba, that no garbage has been dumped in the target section of the facility since June. So from my understanding, when Prairie Landfill found out, that Prairie Green Landfill found out that the women were there, roughly where they would be, no more garbage was dumped in that area. Hopefully making it just that little bit easier to find them. And we're hopeful. The January 17, 2023, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs says it's expected to complete the feasibility study on whether it's possible to recover the two women's remains by March. The First Nation advocacy group is also part of the landfill search committee, says that they're also looking at searching a second landfill in Winnipeg, but right now they're just focusing on Prairie Green. Winnipeg's Brady Road landfill reopens to the public, which was kind of, people were upset about that. People wanted it to continue to be searched because that's where the final victim was discovered, Rebecca. And so there's a possibility that there's still more women. Like, these are the 4 that we are aware of. There is a possibility that there could be more. But at this point, I don't want to say there is, but we do know of these 4. The same day, a spokesperson for the city that the cell where her remains were found hasn't been used since. So these, just a photo of the demonstration. They had totally blocked off the road to the landfill, and a lot of these demonstrators are now, they have a camp, I believe it's called Camp Marcedes, that it sits behind the Human Rights Museum, which we have the National Human Rights Museums in Winnipeg, which is just kind of a thing. Manitoba's premier pledges the support for a feasibility study. Heather Stephenson, who was our premier at the time this happened, was really wishy-washy on it, I think is the best way to put it. And she was also only premier because our other premier had stepped down. So we now have Wab Kinew as our premier, and he's more interested and more willing to have the landfill searched. They had to, when we first learned about this, they had to there was a big discussion about who's going to pay for this. And I think there was a discussion. It's like, I think most people would be willing to have tax dollars go to pay for this. Like, this is important to a lot of Manitobans. And I think it's also important to a lot of people that aren't in Manitoba. To give you an idea of like how big this epidemic of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit is, I think most people, whether or not you're Indigenous, Inuit, or Métis, know someone who's been directly affected. Like, I can think of girls in my school that were affected and experienced violence at rates that most people don't. The federal government did confirm it will cover the cost to study. So we've discussed that. In December of 2022, we were trying to find ways to search the landfill because there is the concern about the safety of people who are going to be searching the landfill. And we want those people to be safe while they're doing this. That same month, operations were paused at that landfill. Um, they want at the start, they didn't think they were going to be searching it. So that is a change. When this first kind of started happening, they weren't sure if they would be searching the landfill. So this is Cambria Harris, and that she is the daughter of Morgan Harris, one of the victims. In December 4th in 2022, the unidentified woman was given the name Buffalo Woman, um, by the community, and this name is also being respected by the Winnipeg police officers. So the Winnipeg police are also calling her Buffalo Woman. That's kind of the unanimous thing. Um, the police do believe she is Indigenous and in her 20s. We don't know how they have determined that. So trials and the media surrounding trials works a little differently in Canada as compared to some of the states. Because you can watch court TV. They live stream some of it. I don't know if I've ever seen a Canadian trial live streamed. There's been a lot of vigils. December 1st, 2022, he was announced, and the police announced that Skibicki was being charged with the death of Harris, Myran, and Buffalo Woman. He was already in custody because at this point they had him in custody. They had arrested him for the first-degree murder of, I believe it was Rebecca. She was the first victim to be found. So Myron was already reported missing months, had been reported missing long time ago. Like she's been missing for a while. Um, and the police had issued a missing persons statement through Bear Clan Patrol, and Bear Clan Patrol is kind of a community-driven, an Indigenous community-driven program to help notify people when they go missing, specifically Indigenous people and Métis and Inuit when they go missing in the area. A lot of people follow them. I follow them. Um, I just think it's important. They were her mother. So Myra's grandmother says her mother was initially afraid to go to the police because she didn't know, she was scared to learn if something was going to happen to her. One of the calls to action stated that there needs to be a better relationship built between Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit communities with the police of Canada. There is a big, I don't know the right word for it. It's been a long-standing issue. A lot of Indigenous communities don't trust the police. They don't trust police officers because there has been a history of racism. There has been a history of abuse. I believe there was just a case in Alberta where the police are responsible for killing a young man because they would just take usually Indigenous men. They would just take them and drop them off outside of town. Didn't matter if it was like -30 outside. June 21st, 2002, police announced that human remains found at the city-run Brady Road Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg a week earlier have been identified as Rebecca's. So she was the first, I believe, the first person to be found. They found part of her remains at the landfill, and they found part of her remains in a dumpster. It has been. I think it's kind of been going since people first came, like, first white people came to the North America. There's been a long-standing history both in Canada and the United States, and I would also argue for Indigenous people in Mexico, of specifically women being captured and abused, often sexually abused, um, and taken away from their homes. So it's not a new trend. It's been going on for a long time, and I, it's it's like you know, I think one acknowledgement is important. To We have to do better, right? Um, I think Washington State, I know, is the one state that does have it. Um, it's similar to an Amber Alert. It's like called Red Dress Alert. Manitoba is going to be implementing one, so it works kind of the same way as an Amber Alert does, and so it'll alert sooner. You get the alert on your phone. I don't know if you've ever gotten an Amber Alert. You know how your phone does the thing. It sets off an alarm, and you get the notification, and you get the description and what they were last wearing and where they may be, what area. That is something that I think will be a really good step forward. Um, I think I just think those kind of alerts are really important because they are vulnerable people within our society and our communities that need that. Like a silver alert, amber alert, red dress alert, I think are all very important things. June 20th, 2022, homicide investigators determined Harris and Myra's remains were likely at the Prairie Green landfill, but they didn't disclose this until December. So the police had known for a while. Um, Unfortunately, by then, about 10,000 loads of debris had been dumped where, like, on top of where they were interested in. So the way landfills kind of work, I don't know why I know this. Um, they dump in certain areas for a period of time, but they keep really important, like they keep really good records on it. Just in these events, also probably just for record keeping, people like to record keep. Um, and so when an area is being dumped on, they'll like record when these loads are dumped, the dates, date and year. And so by looking through those records, that's, I'm guessing, how they estimated whereabouts, which load, and which area they suspect the remains of these women to be. Police announced that they found partial human remains at the Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg during a 2-week search connected to the killing of Rebecca. Um, Earlier, obviously, they had been searching for her remains. Around this time, garbage stops getting dumped in the Prairie Green landfill cell where Harris and Myron's remains are believed to be. Again, this fact isn't disclosed until a lot later, and it isn't disclosed until they're talking about whether it's feasible to search the landfill. So some of this information had been withheld for a while. Um, I'm not sure why. Personally, I'm not law enforcement. I don't have a history with law enforcement. I couldn't tell you. In May, on May 19th, 2022, police announced they've charged Skibicki with first-degree murder and they've put him in custody. They also identify Rebecca as the person who part of her remains were found North Kildona, um, in a dumpster. They found her remains in a dumpster. A part of them anyway. Unfortunately, they found part of her there and then again found the other part in the landfill, which I think is like a really horrific thing to think about. Anytime you come across this sort of thing, it's really horrendous to think about, like the fact that you find part here and part here. I don't know about anyone else. That just bugs me a lot. They've executed a search warrant on his residence and announced a potential scene has been identified at the landfill. And at this point, when Rebecca was identified, the police announced that they haven't ruled out the possibility of more victims. So when she was identified and they searched his place after he was put in custody. That's when they announced that there was a possibility of more victims. And I think the scope of how big this was going to be was kind of starting to set in. May 18th is when he was initially arrested. May 16th, police searched through the garbage bins behind the North Kildona apartment. The search was prompted after partial remains, later confirmed to be Rebecca, were found. This is also the day they believe the remains of Harris and Myran were transported to the Prairie Green landfill, and the day police say Harris was reported missing. So it kind of sounds like he was dumping all the remains at once at different locations, which is something you hear about in a lot of different cases. May 15th or 14th, this is when they believe Skibicki killed Rebecca. May 4th is when the police believe he killed Myran. May 1st is when the police believe that Skibicki killed Harris. This is also the date Harris was last seen near the area of Main Street and Henry Avenue in Winnipeg, police say later in May, when they announced that she was missing. Two of the women belong to the same, I believe it's band is what, like, a band they're called, which is Long Plains First Nation. On March 15th, police believe Skibicki killed the woman the community has named Buffalo Women. This is also the last time Myran had contact with her family, and she was last listed as seen. She was last seen in Winnipeg's North End. I don't expect any of you to be familiar with Winnipeg, but Winnipeg's North End is the not good end of the city. It is kind of a dangerous area to be in. Unfortunately, there's a lot of crime and violence that occurs there. This is a photo of one of the vigils. There's been a lot of vigils, especially within the last few years, in part because of the finding of, it started with 215 children at the residential school in BC, but a lot of vigils have been occurring since then to help find more of these women, and also as remembrance for those who have been lost. December 23rd, 2021, the Crown stays assault charges, the Crown being like the people in charge of the legal system, against Skibicki, stemming from an alleged attack on his estranged wife almost a year earlier. A spokesperson for the province later says those charges were reevaluated after a judge made findings about the reliability of the woman's testimony in a separate trial involving Skibicki and his estranged wife around the same time. So this is well before, like, we're talking before any of the killings happened, before any of the women's lives were taken. So this is just kind of giving you a history of his involvement with the law. December 14th, 2021, a judge acquits Skibicki in the trial connection with an alleged violation of an order that banned him from contacting his estranged wife. The judge said he found her testimony unreliable due to her memory issues. This woman, she hasn't been identified. The woman's mother says her daughter was diagnosed with post-concussive syndrome after an earlier attack involving the same man. And one of the symptoms of post-concussion syndrome is memory issues. So I think this is where we're going to start seeing that pattern of history of violence towards women. In October 2021, a friend of Skibicki, who also has not been named, who spent time with the accused in an apartment Skibicki lived in from this year to the time of his arrest, said Skibicki went to Winnipeg shelters for meals. The friend also said he took the bus daily to one of these shelters for breakfast and lunch, and often went to Siloam Mission for dinner. I think this is important to note because this is likely how he found a lot of the women he came in contact with and later took their lives. Again, he is this is still all alleged. Like this part isn't, but he's still allegedly the killer. He's not been found guilty or not guilty at this point. During his time in the apartment, the friend said that he saw about half a dozen women he believed were Indigenous come and go. Skibicki told him that he had at least 30 women stay with him for varying periods of time. The women often carried bags with what appeared to be their clothing and belongings, and he also saw drug paraphernalia within the apartment. Now that I look back, it's predatory behavior, he said. He's looking for the absolute most vulnerable. And if we're going with this is probably how he picked the women he was going to allegedly pick the women he later killed. And it is predatory behavior. He's not he's not a homeless shelter. He's not. There's programs specifically for women and girls, and there's also other programs specifically for Indigenous women and girls within our province. So, January 2021, Skibicki's estranged wife alleges her husband assaulted her. The woman's mother said it involved an incident in which her daughter was chased down an apartment hallway with a knife. The incident left the woman with injuries from being punched in the head and hit over the head with a cane. He was charged with assault with a weapon and assault causing bodily harm, but those charges ended up being stayed. And again, the judge stayed those charges because he found the woman's testimony unreliable because of memory issues, which she likely were a result of that. In September 2029, a year after they got married, Skibicki's estranged wife is granted a protection order against him for 3 years. She alleges both on an application and a hearing that she suffered a litany of abuse at his hands, and he has threatened to kill her. So, again, this is just building up that kind of history of violence that would lead to someone taking another person's life. In 2028 of September, he marries this woman who's now his estranged wife. She later says in the protection order hearing that she was under the influence on their wedding day and went to detox for meth 4 days later, which is very alarming. If you're marrying someone and they're under the influence, that's really alarming. December 21st, 2015, so quite a ways back, a different woman who is Skibicki's common law partner. Common law is a fairly common thing in Manitoba. Files for a protection order against him, saying in her application she feared he won't stop until I'm dead. Her request is dismissed. It's not clear why, but conditions of Skibicki's probation from a conviction for an assault against her 2 months before. So she's filed for this protection order, and it's denied. And 2 months before this, he had assaulted her. He's on probation, required that he stay away from his partner and not make contact for 2 years. August 25th, Skibicki is convicted of assaulting his common law partner. He only spent 2 months behind bars. 2 months. and then 2 years of probation. And the actual assault of this common law partner occurred in June 15th, 2015. According to the statement of facts later agreed to by the Crown and defense attorneys, Skibicki grabbed his pregnant partner's hair, punched her in the face several times, and tried to strangle her. He also told her that he would kill her if she called the police. So, by this timeline, there is, again, he is allegedly the victim, or allegedly the killer. It's not been proven in court yet. He is on trial right now. He has a history of violence. He has a provable history of violence. I'm going to link this article in the chat for people who want to read it or reference it at any point. So yeah, like that I think is horrendous. I think it's horrible that there's this history. And I also think it talks a bit about how, or shows some flaws in our system when it comes to prosecuting domestic violence, if that makes sense. I think it's kind of alarming that that judge stayed charges because the women's testimony was unreliable, but she was experiencing memory issues because of a condition that may have been caused by him. I would have asked a doctor, but I guess I don't know. I don't know how that would have gone. So, one of the first things, I have another article to bring up. I just have to find where it went. One of the first things that Skibicki's defense team tried to do was drop some of the charges because, just a second, I have to find it. Drop some of the charges because they did not have the identity of Buffalo women. They said that those charges, I gotta find them. I had them pulled up, but that was one of the first things that they tried to say is that. Well, first of all, he pleaded not guilty for being he pleaded not guilty by not being mentally criminally responsible. So basically that's similar to a not guilty by reason of insanity, I guess would be the best way to play it. It's not listed as that under Canadian law. And so it still stands, if you're not familiar with how that plea works, that the person is not mentally aware of what they're doing. They can't one be like they don't. I think it's like the knowledge, and they can't appreciate what they're doing. And when they say appreciate, that's like the secondary thought process that comes after you do the act. Then you think about it after, and they don't know what they're doing is morally wrong. They're saying he mentally didn't know what he was doing, or mentally not well enough to say he couldn't or he didn't know what he was doing was wrong, which kind of a big thing in Manitoba. I don't remember the year, but it was a very big case. In what year was it? 2008. For people who aren't aware, there was a murder on a Greyhound bus here in Manitoba. It was on the Trans-Canada Highway. And if you have heard about it, it's probably because the killer, Vincent Lee, his name has been changed at this point, but I'm not going to use it, cannibalized part of the victim, Tim McLean, a 22-year-old man, like a really tragic case, but he he killed and cannibalized part of him on a Greyhound bus. People were forced to see this. Some of the responding officers, I believe at least one of the responding officers, uh, developed post-traumatic stress disorder and took his life as a result of this incident. It had a huge impact on the community. But Vincent Lee was found not criminally insane or criminally responsible by mental health because he had a very long history of schizophrenia, both in Canada and from his home country. I believe he was from China, and had not been taking medication. And now there was like cultural impact of like why he hadn't been taking that medication. It's not in his family viewed as, mental health isn't taken as seriously in certain communities. And because he was not taking and treating his schizophrenia in the way that he should have, he believed, I think it was aliens were telling him that he had to kill this guy. And it was a whole thing. I was a lot younger. So he had to go to a high security mental health facility. And he received quite a bit of treatment there. And has actually at this point been released. He is now released. He was granted a name change. He's back in the community, hopefully. I hope he's doing well. But that's like, I think the last time there was like a big high profile case like this. So it's not unheard of in our province. We've seen it before. Oh, one murder, sure, but 3 out of 4. Yeah, I think it's hard to argue when it's multiple like that. Most of the time you would argue that they are, like, there's planning and meditation that goes into multiple. Oh, Daryl Brooks. That was a case. Yeah. Daryl Brooks was something else. But so that's Skibicki's plea. And then the second time they had the discussion, they tried to get, again, I'm just trying to find the article so I can share it with you guys. They tried to argue that they shouldn't charge him for the murder of Buffalo women because they, one, did not have her identity, and two, they did not have her body, which definitely makes me a little anxious that they don't have 3 of the women's bodies. It is alarming. It is kind of upsetting. I wonder how that's going to play out. So that's the first thing his judges did. I'll still find it. But the second thing his judges did, or his defense team did, is they are trying to. So this is one article. It is from May 1st, so it's a few days ago. They're trying to get the jury tossed out. 3 different, yeah, none of them, not one. And they were all guilty. But they are trying to get the jury tossed out. So it is your right to have a trial by judge alone or with a jury. They've also argued that they're trying to toss the jury, arguing pervasive media coverage may have caused an unconscious bias among the select jurors. They are pushing to have the trial heard by judge alone instead of a jury, arguing his rights are being violated. As soon as you have a partial jury, you're not having an impartial trial, and that's the right of the accused. This is reasonable. There is reasonable probability that the potential jury pool was prejudiced, and that the jurors that we actually selected are prejudiced. They pointed to a poll commissioned by a defense showing the strong negative opinion of Skibicki in the community, with 81% of the community believing he is guilty and 66% saying they would find it unacceptable if he was to be found not criminally responsible by way of mental disorder. The town has a history of that. So I think they either want to delay the trial or they're just trying to get the jury tossed. By hoping that if only the judge hears it, the judge will be easier to, one person is easier to persuade than 12. You know what I mean? Like, I hope that comes across well. The defense has called a US-based cognitive psychologist, Dr. Christina Ruva, as an expert witness this week, due to her research on the influence of pre-trial publicity that can have on jury decision-making. She testified that the more pre-trial publicity there is, the more bias there will be on a jury. Once an opinion of guilt has been formed through pre-trial publicity, she says it is unlikely that it will change during the trial. I would argue that there are cases where people believe they are guilty and then the jury doesn't find them guilty. Famously, I think the O.J. Simpson's case is one of those. What was the woman down in Florida who killed her child? And people were like, oh, she's going to be found guilty. And then she wasn't. You know what I mean? Like, people think. So it does happen. And also, I don't know how much of this trial and this case has been discussed outside of Manitoba. So I don't know how much publicity there actually has been. She said the safest way to avoid unconscious jury bias is only allow people to serve on the jury if they haven't heard of the case before, which I think sometimes is hard. I guess, like, theoretically, if you got a jury of people that weren't from the area completely, like from the other side of Canada. The court heard today that 12 jurors and 2 alternates selected, only 7 had indicated that they had not heard of the case before. The Crown prosecutor, Charles Murray, told the court that her testimony is based on mock jury trials and volunteers participating in studies that did not have a real person's liberty in their hands. This is a dangerous use of social science, he said. We're taking one social science expert who says that they are cemented to a particular view based on those experiments. And on that basis, we are asked to just dispose of our jury system in Canada. He also argued that her expertise is based on the US legal system and not the Canadian, where there is a presumption of impartiality when selecting jurors. The reality is, if we accept her opinion, we can't have jury trials in high-profile cases. Chief Justice Glenn Joyal, who is presiding over the case, said this is a complicated issue. He'll be giving the decision. He was going to decide on Friday. So, Crown prosecutor is like your lead lawyer. I can't remember what it's called in the United States, but it's called the Crown prosecutor in this event. As an update, I believe this was yesterday's. So we're going to play this little clip from CTV Winnipeg. So CTV is also another fairly reputable news source. They're really good for like local news in the area.
Killer Jeremy Skibicki will proceed with a jury. This after the defense argued Skibicki's rights were being violated due to possible prejudice among jurors. CTV's Danton Unger has been following this case at court all week for us and joins us now live with the latest. Danton, what led to this decision?
Well, as you know, Marcedes, Skibicki has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, a charge that automatically requires a jury trial. The accused can request a judge-alone trial, but Crown prosecutors need to be on board. And in Skibicki's case, the Crown has said no, prompting this constitutional question. Now, in court, Skibicki's defense lawyers argued nearly 2 years of what they described as pervasive media coverage in the lead up to the trial may have led to an unconscious bias among jurors. They've been asking the court to toss the jury and
I would argue that the pervasive media coverage hasn't so much been about the trial as it has been about searching the landfill, which is why the stream is called Searching the Landfill. Most of what I've seen, and I follow the news relatively closely, and what people had talked about was finding these women's remains, finding their bodies, and the wider discussion of missing and murdered Indigenous women and Two-Spirit. So it has been discussed. I don't think it's been about him.
proceed with a judge alone, arguing Skibicki's rights to a fair trial are being violated. But Chief Justice Glenn Joyal disagreed, saying in his decision today, while it's expected the jurors, much like judges, are shaped by their lived experience, including the media they digest, in the Canadian judicial system, we believe jurors are able to rise to the heightened expectations required of their role in order to ensure a fair trial is provided to the accused persons.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I think it's silly. Like, people weren't talking about him. People were talking about getting these women home. And I think if anyone has ever experienced losing a loved one this way, that it's horrendous. It's really difficult. And one of those final comforts is having them brought home. That's also been a very wide discussion when it comes to the children's remains found at residential schools, which is another huge ongoing issue. It's not as much in the news, but it's still a very large issue. All children matter. Every child counts. Every child matters. And a lot of ceremonies have been around, hopefully helping them, their spirits find their way home. So I think that's what people have been talking about, and people haven't been talking about him. Regardless of this, the judge has decided that the trial will go with a jury. They are going to have a jury, so that has been tossed out. Now, that's kind of where the case has ended
He
for
says
now.
in this case, the jury has already faced rigorous questioning and will be given further instruction about their role to make a finding based on the evidence presented in court alone. Skibicki's lawyers told us today this won't change how they proceed with the case.
His Lordship made a decision. We had vigorous testimony. We thought our arguments were impeccable, made by my colleague back here. But the Lordship made a decision, and we'll take it from there.
Defense lawyers have told the court they plan to argue Skibicki is not criminally responsible for the 4 killings by way of mental disorder. He's pleaded not guilty.
Dan, now that this is dealt with, when will the actual trial begin?
Next Wednesday, Merely. That's when the jury will start to hear evidence. The trial is scheduled to last 21 days.
So again, the judge, like he just said, the judge says, no, there's going to be a jury. I hope the jury has some level of support. I think it's really important in all criminal cases, especially when they get to this level of violence, that a jury also have some kind of support system in place for them. Because I know that, they can't talk about it outside of the room, but having to hear and see some of what they're going to have to hear and see is going to be really hard to cope with. I think it's something that sometimes we forget about. In the Daryl Brooks case, did they not have a therapy dog to help with people testifying? I hope they have something like that for the jury as well, because it is going to be a very difficult thing. It's going to be really hard. I will also link this case, or this for you guys as well, just in case people want to watch this, or if they want to follow this on their own time. From my understanding, the trial is not going to be streamed anywhere. I don't think that happens particularly often in Canadian law. So I wouldn't be doing, and I'm not sure I could do, sometimes I can watch cases. It's very dependent. This is from the same day. This is just the CBC News article. If you prefer CBC News, there's that one. People have their preference when it comes to news sources. Now, I guess we're not going to hear any more really until Wednesday. So I want to pivot just a tiny bit to talk about or share some of the importance of the name given to Buffalo Woman. This was a vigil that was held. A previously unnamed woman known only as the sole unidentified victim of alleged serial killer in Winnipeg has now been given the name Buffalo Women. I struggle to pronounce that. I don't want to do it really bad. This article was initially posted on December 5th, 2022. The way that we refer to people impacts the way we think about them, said Jolly, who was part of the group that came up with the name for the woman. Whether or not we know her name, she has one. Whether or not we know her family, she has one. And we wanted to honor that in her. Winnipeg police said on the Monday following that they will also use this name going forward. So the police are respecting this, which I think is a good step. I think the police doing this and respecting the name Buffalo Woman for this person does show a kind of that importance and that desire to reconcile. Reconciliation is a really big topic in Canada. It's been a really big topic for a while now, and it's also a divisive topic. I wish it wasn't. I wish everyone wanted to reconcile, but that's just unfortunately not where we are. Police said last week they believe she was killed by Skibicki, who was also charged in May for the murder of Rebecca. Unfortunately, I'm not great at pronouncing some of these names, but she was from Crane River, which is on the western shore of Lake Manitoba. Crane River is not that far. I know where Crane River is. 2 of the additional alleged victims are identified as Morgan Harris, 39, Marcedes Myran, 26. So the oldest is Morgan, but these are young people. These are young people, and I think that's one of the tragedies. And they believe Buffalo Woman was in her 20s as well, is that these women are taken from us so young. All identified women had been living in Winnipeg, and few details have been released about Buffalo Woman, who police said they believed was Indigenous in her mid-20s. Teaching of the Buffalo. Jolly said the specific name of Buffalo Woman was decided on after someone brought forward a teaching of Grandmother Buffalo, the Buffalo Spirit, giving her name to those of us who don't have spirit names yet so that we know each other. The teaching seemed to fit nicely with our situation, where we have a woman who hasn't found her name yet. Or, rather, we haven't found her name yet. Thelma Morrisou, who goes by the name, bad at names, was one of the grandmothers that took part in the naming ceremony, said, calling the woman by a spirit name also ensures she's recognized and acknowledged in the spirit realm. That is the teaching and beliefs and the spiritual teachings of our people, who is also from Crane River, which is where Rebecca is from. I'm okay if others don't understand or can't accept. I know it to be the truth. I have faith and I have belief. That is what we've been taught. Adding, she'll be calling the woman, again, I'm not good at these things. I don't want to inappropriately pronounce them. Adding the final moniker because the woman is deceased. Police have found the remains, but none of the other women's bodies. So I am worried again how that is going to play out in the trial of not having 3 of the women. There are arguments in previous cases in other places that have been argued that, well, they don't have the remains, they can't, like, that they can't prove they're gone. So and we don't know what evidence the police has. It's been kept very close, or they've been tight-lipped about it. The group wanted to give a woman a name as soon as possible for 7 reasons, including the police could start using it. In a news release on the Monday afternoon, the Winnipeg Police Service said they will do just that. The change was made as a sign of respect and at the request of community advocates, knowledge keepers, elders, and leadership, the release said. Members of the police service, including the Force's family support and resource advocate, are also meeting with the family representative and leadership. Police will provide no further comment until those meetings are done. They also wanted to have the name ready in a time for a vigil for missing and murdered Indigenous people that happened that following Sunday. I think giving her a piece of her identity back, giving her as much of her identity as we can, acknowledges that she's an Indigenous woman, that she is sacred, and that she's also gifted that name by Buffalo Spirit. I think that's important for all of us. That echoes a statement shared at the rally by Point Douglas MLA Bernadette Smith, whose sister Claudette Osborne went missing in 2008. So like I said earlier, sorry, I'm getting a little teared up. Most people know of someone who has gone missing, a missing Indigenous family member, or a friend who's gone missing and has never been found. It's one of those things that, in a way, you normalize it, but you shouldn't normalize it. It shouldn't be a normalized thing. We don't want someone to be known as unidentified, Smith said. A life is sacred. Dolores Daniels, whose 19-year-old daughter, Sarah McKay, was fatally beaten on Sakig First Nation in 2017, said Buffalo Woman was also the spirit name her daughter was given after her death. The buffalo represents respect, and that our people need to be respected, and the men out there need to respect our women. She says, while advocates can't force anyone to use the name, she hopes people see why it's important. I think people who don't use it need to do a little more thinking about what the name is for. Need to do a little bit more thinking about why her name is important and why it is important to think about her in this way until we find her name. And I agree. I think it is very important. I will link this article as well for people who want to maybe reference it in the future. And then just a couple final things, because again, we're not going to know much more about this until Wednesday. I'm going to pause this and share this tab instead. New red dress alert system to be developed in Manitoba. So I was discussing this a bit earlier. A new pilot program which will notify the public of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit and gender diverse people is set to be implemented in Manitoba. It's called the Red Dress Alert System, and it is a partnership between Ottawa and the province. Last year, the Winnipeg Centre NDP MP, NDP stands for New Democratic Party, Leah Gazin, proposed the motion in the House of Commons declaring the death and disappearance of Indigenous women and girls a Canadian-wide emergency. The motion called for an immediate funding for this system. It's going to run akin to the Amber Alert program and the Silver Alerts. So Amber Alert is for youth, and Silver Alerts are for vulnerable seniors who go missing. I think an important thing to note is this motion was unanimously backed, so people were very much behind this. In March, according to a release from the NDP, a study into the Red Dress Alert System began at the Status of Women Committee. It heard from family members, survivors, and grassroots leaders to provide recommendations on the best way to implement the alert. Meanwhile, similar alert systems have already been implemented south of the border. So Washington State has theirs. It coexists with amber alerts and silver alerts. California has a feather alert program as of 2022. It is available to law enforcement investigating the suspicious or unexplained disappearances of an Indigenous woman or Indigenous person. The alert provides immediate information to the public to aid in swift recovery. Statistics Canada concluded in a report last year that the homicide rate for Indigenous women and girls is 6 times higher. 6 times higher than the rate for their non-Indigenous counterparts. A national inquiry concluded 5 years ago that they are 12 times more likely to go missing and murdered. This was the call to action that they had requested. Again, it's been slow implementing. It felt like, in my personal opinion, that could have been handled a lot better. This, again, just my personal opinion. Everyone is going to have different feelings about that. So I'm going to link kind of in the final bit here. 2 more things. One is her name is Vanessa. She's Inuit. I am linking her because she's one of the big voices, and I think a very good voice in Manitoba when it comes to the discussion of how we can support these changes and how we can support the finding of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Her sister is one of them. So she has lost her sister. She also does make red dress pins and necklaces. There is a donate option. I just think she's a really great resource for people. So I will link her there. I follow, and I do think she's a really good resource. I'm also going to link this little group, or not little group, they're a big group. They are in Winnipeg, and they help Indigenous peoples and their families. They're community-based. I think they're a really great organization. I think they deserve all of the funding they get. So if you feel like doing any kind of donating, this is an option, but there's also, I would argue, that you could donate to local, like if you look up in your state or your province, the different options to support Indigenous peoples in your area, to do a more specific one. But I wanted to share this one just because we are discussing an incident in Winnipeg. They are from Winnipeg. And that's the stream for today. Again, I will probably maybe next weekend do another stream to discuss whatever comes out of the rest of the trial. I do want to follow it. I do want people's eyes to be on it. I think these things are like super important. I think this is just a really important, just going to be a really important thing. And sorry, I'm just picking a song for the end. And I think it's something all people should be discussing. I think we should be discussing this. I think, especially with the current political climate and with everything that's going on in our world today, it sometimes feels like there's nothing we can do. But I think when we can do all of these little things together and we can support each other, that does make big things happen. I know some people aren't necessarily going to agree with that, but I think when we kind of do the small things, they lead to the big things. I thank you for coming. I hope you'll be there for the next one. I'm still learning to get my stream my streaming stuff good. You know, I'm still learning that. So I hope I did it justice. Yeah, I think we don't always know these things. Like there's issues in the United States that I wouldn't know about. And the only way you know about things is if people take the time to sit down and talk about them. I recommend again, Resilient Inuk Creations. She's a really great resource for people who want to know more. I would also recommend there's lots of elders online who talk about these things. And again, I think like this is going to be an important case, so I will talk about it later. But I appreciate everyone stopping by. I'm going to play another. This kind of a nice album. All of these songs were actually recorded in different national parks. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
We complain about the rain, but we pray for this rain. You can know where you came if you don't know about